So I would like to introduce to the podcast Jan. He's a friend of mine and a very interesting researcher. Obviously, everything that I'm doing is research related with Sifter and helping those that are trying to find out things about anything. And Jan I know quite well, and I've learned quite a few interesting things about how he's tried to, let's say, acquire information and, let's say, catalog it and then do things with it. So outside of that, I'd like to introduce Jan. I think maybe the first kind of jumping off point is how did you get into research in general, or is it a mentality?
Out of fear, basically. So I come from a generation of humanities students that basically enter the academia world with the utter fear of, I'm going to fail because I'm a humanities student. There's no prospects. In Poland, we used to have this thing where you were enrolled in high school and you chose your elective courses, whatever that's called. If you chose too many humanities, people would say that you'll end up working at McDonald's and things like this. So we had this atmosphere of how do I go through humanities and then somehow graduate being useful and being able to make money and so on and so on. So I was terrified of this. And through just making choices into becoming more and more focused on like practical skills, I got into research, right? So I ended up being a researcher out of basically pragmatism, trying to be helpful and useful, right, on the job market.
Yeah, but like from what I know of you, your systematic nature is incredibly useful, incredibly practical. So you were trying to understand things, but you were not making it practical for others, or what was the thing?
So I think I'm just an inquisitive person by nature. And, as far as I can recall, I've always had this obsession with lists and collections, right? And this goes back to when I was a kid. So anything that was a group, a category, whatever, that I could somehow organize and revisit and grow with it was always exciting to me. So, to others, lists are boring and you have to like tick through them. To me, they're something that you use to grow with, So yeah, it's a mix of being inquisitive by nature and also liking to do research and having this like sort of meticulous, almost anal way about, approaching things. So yeah, that's
what was the first topic? What was the first one? You're like, okay, I need to really catalog this thing.
Like going back to when I was a kid, or
kid.
Okay. I think I was subscribed to some sort of early reading magazines where you're like super small, and then once a month there comes a reading material for kids in the post, and I would have a collection of this. All my aunties and uncles knew that if there was anything to be collected, they would have to like take it and bring it to me. So I had people, collect postal stamps for me, pins, whatever themed postcards, whatever. I've had like boxes of collections, right? And I would just whip them out every now and then. I was like, oh, I've got this many old coins and I've got this many old pins, but the pins are like whatever. So it's just like really compulsive obsessive about cataloging things, right? But I'd say the first topic that I've researched sort of semi-professionally, because that was meant for my bachelor's, was the media approach, like British media approach to the 2004 European Union expansion, sort of Polish migration into UK, because post 2004 there were like 2 million Poles suddenly in UK, and different types of media had a different reaction, right? So the left-wing press would have one, and the right-wing would have different one. So my bachelor thesis was basically just sort of trying to organize, sort of from communications perspective, how do different lenses of different political sort of divides in UK in media, how do they present Poles? Not how Poles present themselves, but how do British media present Poles? What is the filter? So that was like the first thing that I've researched on a semi-professional sort of level. And that kind of led me to like a string of internships in, let's just call it broadly, NGOs, because I thought that was fitting, some sort of migration issues, migrant relations, something like this. I wanted to sort of fit that into, okay, so migrants, minorities. I thought if I kind of stretch that a bit more, then I'm going to get into the world of NGOs. And if I do that, then surely I'll be set, like my naive 20-year-old mind thought that if I get to NGOs, that's a career, right? I don't think so anymore. But at that time, that was like my ticket. So yeah, like that was the early days, let's say, of research when I was early 20s.
So I think it's very curious because basically your research mentality seems to come from cataloging or collection, actually. So I think data or information is just a later stage version of collection, right? So we can collect stamps, or we can collect something that's digital. So it seems like it comes from the mentality of collecting and then cataloging, which is pretty interesting. My dad also does the stamp collecting thing, and he's very proud. He has like at least one Caribbean island he has all the stamps of to a certain period. Yeah, for him it's amazing. So that's really interesting. So in the cataloging of different things, what have you found in your process? So I know I have a similar mentality. So like when it comes to cataloging different things, is it the curiosity of understanding what is? Is it understanding how things work? Or is it a combination? Or is it something else completely that I'm not aware of?
I think I just like to have some degree of control over what I study or investigate. So when you enter the field, as you call it, right, the field work, it's initially it's just an unorganized mess, right? There's so much noise. There's things that you want, there's things that are irrelevant, there's things that are really interesting but not useful for whatever you're doing it. Because sometimes the research requires certain outcomes. You're expected to deliver either guidelines or a product or whatever that assignment is. There will be things that are very useful for it. There will be things that were interesting but not useful. There will be noise. So I guess I always like to bring a level of control to that process. And it's sort of a narrowing down, right? So you start broad and then you go narrower. Then sometimes you have to go broad again for whatever reason, then narrow again. So it's kind of like back and forth, right? But every time you approach it again, it's with a little bit more control or purpose. Sometimes you can't investigate something fully, but to whatever end you're doing that, you can sort of narrow it down to be practical, right? So yeah.
Interesting. One of the things I'm incredibly curious about is the manipulation of information, as you know. So have you found in your process, or when you're like researching different things, obviously you have different perspectives, and how do you navigate things like that? So historic perspective.
Okay, so maybe to provide a little more context, one of my most sort of independent projects that I've done, so the one that I've designed, sort of carried out, and it was a residency with a Christiania research department. Christiania is a sort of, let's call it a quote-unquote utopia in Copenhagen. It's famous for being very lenient on drugs, and it's supposed to be like a hippie world inside mainstream Copenhagen, right? So people think of it as a utopia. But they also have a research department, so you can enroll with your project, you can design it, and then if they're welcoming, if they think it's good for them, then they will allow you to do it. So I've designed a project which would be a comparative study between Christiania and another community that is similar in age and sort of also dubbed a utopia in India, which is called Auroville. And my point of entry to that research was basically trying to investigate whether it is, if they deserve being called utopias. Are they utopias? Is it useful to call them utopias? Are they just a hoax? Are they fallen utopias? Have they, so lots of questions of criticisms towards both communities. There's a lot of bad press and a lot of good press, right? There's a lot of superficial media sort of noise, let's call it, which is like those snippets of information. Like, did you know there's a place in Copenhagen where you can smoke weed and everyone walks naked? And that's all you get. Like, this is the reel you get on your Instagram feed, right? So that's really captivating, but it tells you very little. It just gives you a hook. Or the other way, there's, things, did you know there's a utopia in Indian jungle where there's no religion and no, ideologies and no money. And that's all you get. That's the snippet. So you have the superficial junk that you want to investigate if it's true or not. There's a lot of noise and there's a lot of bias and prejudice. So the project was set up to be comparative analysis between the two, but also an investigation into how much truth there is to all the bias and all the gossip. And then most importantly, I needed to root it in something useful. I wanted the guidelines or the outcome of the project to be useful to everyone. So the focal point of the whole research was sort of, are the utopias entrepreneurial? Is there like an innovative spirit in them? Or are they sort of set in, sort of stuck in one format, sort of just reliving the same dream over and over without adding anything new, not growing, not developing any, creative ideas, products, and so on. So ideally, the way I framed it, I wanted to see, first of all, how much truth there is to the utopia. And two, if they're innovative, if they're creative, entrepreneurial, just how much chance would other actors have, like companies, governments, just individuals? How much space is there for potential collaboration with those utopias if you wanted to do something? And if you can collaborate with them, what are the do's and don'ts of collaborating with a quote-unquote utopia? Like if there's like a manual, maybe there's things that you shouldn't say, maybe there's things you shouldn't do, not to overstep. and so on and so forth. So coming back to your question, yeah, that project was a perfect sort of testing ground for confronting bullshit. And like whatever media wants you to think about those utopias, I wanted to see for myself if there's any truth to it.
This is the interesting thing just generally about research, because I don't think it's just research. In my perspective, it's this kind of this thing of like clarity for oneself and then for other people. So when you're talking about like not necessarily manipulation, but the framing of media of something, which is then telling people what something is, for either attention or a headline or another reason specific.
Clickbait oftentimes.
Yeah, definitely. And so this is, in my opinion, incredibly common. But I'm very curious because in the research framing, also like with what we want to do in SIFTA, you basically have a research question, like a singular and then threaded. So in your case, you have a specific thing that you would like to figure out if this is true or not. And then from that, in your investigation, you'll start to find out if certain things prove your assumption. In some cases, probably like flip it.
Yeah.
I don't know necessarily.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's like, what was that question in this case that you're talking about? And what was the question to yourself, the major one?
The question to myself?
The research question.
So there's an issue of content of what, Christiania or Araville, what do they produce content-wise? But there was also a secondary issue that was really relevant to me, which is how do I enter the field with my ethnographic skill set? Because I like to think of myself as an ethnographer, right? So cultural analyst. And how do I allow for my research, for my methods to be sort of non-intrusive to what I assumed were, like I had to assume they were, at least to some degree, true utopias. To some level, at least. So hippies, basically. How do I deal with?
The question would be something around like, is this a utopia, or how does this?
How do
work?
I infiltrate the world of hippies without biasing their answers, having them do whatever they do truthfully and honestly in front of me? How do I study them without intruding, but also extracting the information that no one else would get, right? Like, so no one who from the outside wouldn't get, right?
So like, how do they function? How do they work?
What are the ways? What are the dynamics between them? I sort of chose this theory as a sort of framework for my research, which is called a systems theory, right? Mm-hmm. And in systems theory, there's this premise that every system can collapse on itself if there's either too much elements of order or disorder. So if you have that in mind, that everything is a system, even utopias are systems, because they have to be born somehow, they have to be sustained. Even if we believe the clickbait that there's no money, no religion, no nothing. Okay, so how do they feed themselves? How do they clothe themselves? How do they communicate with the outside world? Assuming all of the clickbait stuff is real, right? Basically, I was trying to sort of develop a research method that could help me visualize all the dependencies between people, things, events, relations within the community. And if that is a model and a model of a system, what are the forces that would have to sort of come in contact with this system, with this model, for it to either thrive or collapse, right? So I was trying to pinpoint elements of order and disorder in Christiania and Oroville, see if they're maybe similar in the two, or if they're different. What are the interrelations between people, events, whatever, rituals, artifacts that they produce, and are they somehow contributing to sustaining the system and the model, or they're somehow ripping it apart? So then you're working with this idea that a place is not just closed off with a set of physical boundaries. Then you work with the idea that a community and a place extends far beyond the physical boundaries. It could be sensorial. You could work with sensorial ethnography, so sound, smell, taste. It could be digital, if they have any digital footprint. They claim to be hippies, but what if they're online? So then you have to account for all these intangible things to contribute to one existing system or a model.
So this is very interesting because, like, in the mapping of general, say, criminal or these investigations where you're either investigating a person or an entity, it's not necessarily ethnographic, but in a certain way it is, because you're trying to understand how a person works and what they do and who they hang out with. So in this case, for me, it's like these two things we're talking about, like timeline of like, you have a certain place and time with a certain family, groupings of family, like Christianity has its different groupings of family. And then over time, and then you're trying to then attach to the intention. I'm just trying to like reverberate if this is true or not. You're trying to attach the intention of chaotic or ordered individuals, or a combination, because no one is just one thing necessarily, but we all definitely know a chaotic family member. So within this, ethnographically, you're trying to, I'm just guessing here, trying to understand what the group dynamics are. So group dynamics are also at a certain point in time, but I guess your research in trying to understand, because you have a framing of utopic, right? Or hippie, or either one, because this is how the outside world perceives this thing. So with the inside research of this thing, I have to ask, did you actually do this research, or that was the project intention?
I did a lot of prep
for the stuff. Yeah. So we can talk about it in such a sense of like how you'd approach it then necessarily. So obviously Christiania is an incredibly interesting place because it has this history. For people that don't know, it's a place in Copenhagen that basically it's an old military base that was taken over by hippies, as we so call it, and then at a later stage the Hells Angels were dealing drugs out of it, and a bunch of other people doing.
That's in like a nutshell, right? But the military base, I think, dates back to in our 18th century. This was originally made to ward off the invasion of Swedes, right? So we're talking old buildings. We're talking very old buildings, beautiful ornamental buildings that are fully decrepit right now. They're like falling apart. And then from 60s up, this space is sort of customized by hippies, right? And made into something entirely else. So you have this layer of this really historical buildings. Then you have a layer of like shacks, basically just makeshift housing. And then you have maybe the most modern layer of like really nice, even kind of designery spaces. If they got hands on any money, they could make it like really nice, tourist friendly. So you have like different historical layers in one spot. There's also this division between the touristy Christiania, which is where everyone goes wishing they could take photos, but then photos are not allowed. This is basically where the concerts take place, where you can eat some food, buy some souvenirs. I think there's like one photo section, photo ops. This is also where all the drug dealing takes place. But there's a second half to Christiania, which is basically surrounding a lake. And this is the big part. This is the private part where the original hippies have been living for the past 50 years. A lot of the housing has been done by hand, sort of DIY huts. Some huts are made with bits of boats. So you have a boathouse on land. Some people were very good architects, so they made it beautiful, sort of coffee table book worthy. Some are not. Some are just shacks. So there's a huge difference between how you interact with whoever's involved in the touristy part, and then there's a difference between being really welcomed into this real part, which is the lake and the surroundings. Yeah.
But I think like the social dynamics of Christiania is very interesting because one of these things we're talking about is like economics. So drugs is actually economic, and they have various forms of trade in there, including like having their own workshop, or meaning like a place we can buy like hardware supplies, and they're outside of the government system that's there. So like in a social dynamics way of like defining if something's a utopia. So it's like, what would be your definition of utopia?
So by definition, utopia is an unachievable place. It's something that cannot exist. That's what it's utopia because it's unachievable. That's the definition. So if you follow that, nothing is a utopia, because if you can enter it, if it exists, then it's not a utopia. So we're working with the premise of like utopia in a sense that is a sort of a pop cultural sort of reference, kind of like how we understand utopias in pop culture, maybe, or maybe an exaggeration turned.
So what is it actually then, Christiania?
What it is, it's an intentional community. This is what it is. So intentional communities is a term for all communities that come from sort of grassroots level. They're drawing people sharing similar beliefs, wanting to do similar things. They're oftentimes, sort of the alternative way into housing, eating. They're oftentimes sustainable. They're collectives. They like to experiment with alternative lifestyles. They don't have to be identical, but that's the term. Intentional community. It's a community formed on a common ground of one intention, right?
Interesting. Now, like, one of the things I want to kind of get into with you, because I know you're an incredible cataloger of all things. So I know at least of one, your nature of like collecting music in a specific way. So I'm very, very curious to like unpack that a little bit and then try to understand your mentality with this. First, why, and then how you went about it.
Okay.
So you can lead into what's going on there.
I mean, I'll try to keep it brief because it's exciting to me. It might be interesting to you, but I can bet you any money that to average listener, this will be a snooze fest.
No, it does not matter. I think anything that has passion, I think people relate.
it comes from a place of passion. I love music. I love listening to music, but I have this kind of obsessive compulsive way about it. It's almost like, when you fidget with things, people like to fidget with different sort of hobbies, right? I fidget with Spotify like it's my bubble wrap, or if you did crochet or whatever.
What do you mean by fidget?
Fidgeting with Spotify means that I see playlists and songs as sort of bricks into making like really elaborate, very highly curated little products of yours, right? So I like to catalog music by decades, vibes, genres, but I'm horribly meticulous about it. So the way I would start this is I would give myself a challenge. Let's just say this hasn't happened, but let's just make it up. Let's just say Aussie music of the 80s, or Irish, Celtic, Gaelic music, whatever.
So these things for me are like lenses.
Lens, right. So I pick a lens, and then this is the challenge. So what I do is I open a sort of a database, an online database, which has a lot of filters in it.
Like which one?
You can filter down to a country, a city, a genre, a decade.
But like what tool or what piece of software?
It's just this really antiquated, really ugly looking website called Rate Your Music. It looks horrible, but it is very useful. It's super useful.
Why is it useful?
Because you can take vast amount of data and narrow it down to like one song in a matter of like 30 seconds if you want to.
So attributes or filters that then get you to that thing?
For sure.
So like a place, a decade, a genre, I don't know what else.
Yeah. So basically the way I would go about it is I would literally just say Australia 1980. It would give me all of the releases, all of the musical releases of the Aussie 80s. And I would literally just listen to every album one by one, up to hundreds. I would listen to 100, 200 albums from Aussie 80s, and I would nitpick the absolute bangers, whatever song I believe is just the goal, the holy grail of songs. I put it aside.
Okay, so we've gone from like quantitative to qualitative. So the qualitative, what is a banger for you? First, you have to define what a banger is too, but I assume they understand.
Typically, I'm giving away secrets, right? I believe that a good playlist should have ups and downs, right? That's something that everyone knows. But I believe that, out of, let's say, 100 songs that you listen to daily, I bet you there's at least one or two that if it comes on, it gives you like this adrenaline rush, like a boost, or a sense of absolute calm. Like it is so, you can really tell the difference, because it's like, this is the song that makes you drop everything and just like close your eyes. And, it's always a different song to a different person, right? But it's the bodily response that you have, right? So the ones that make you hyper, I call an inhale playlist. And the ones that make you sort of completely relaxed, comfortable, and laid back, I call an exhale playlist. So at the end of the day, at the end of the process, I end up with two playlists out of any challenge and a lens. That's an inhale and an exhale. So in this case, I would say these Australia inhale, 1980s Australia exhale. And this is a compilation of just those visceral response songs. Nothing pleasant, nothing generally nice, only the ones that give you the visceral response, right? So the process takes weeks or months, and it forces you to listen to a lot of music that you don't enjoy, very accidental music, random things that are just ridiculous, doesn't really apply to you.
Did you listen to the whole song?
I listened to most of it, and then in the process you also find like weird skits, because albums have skits, or like
skits?
Like an interlude between the songs, like something funny, something spoken, an intro, an outro. Some of them, sometimes you have an album which is just utterly shit, but there's a funny skit in it, or like a really cool outro. I put that aside, right? So in a process of months and months and months of really diligent listening, then you end up with a playlist that is, let's say, 30 or 40 songs long, but serves a visceral purpose of being the inhale or an exhale, right? So I've been doing that for, I want to say, maybe 4 or 5 years. And I've started in the 1920s. And I've just made my way to 2000s. I curate the playlist to have a flow, so I need to tag every song individually. I basically tag them in Microsoft Word.
Yeah, so what's the tags?
So the tags would be, let's say a song starts with a trumpet, and I just literally just write down, in the brackets, I would say like trumpet intro, then syncopated, builds up, energetic, hyper, there's a drop. So basically every song is just a string of tags that describe how it goes up and down, and what are the high points, low points, how it starts and finishes. So if I have all of the songs tagged in Microsoft Word, then I just use the filtering or the box in Microsoft Word that you can find words.
Why Word?
I don't know. I'm old fashioned. And then I basically just, after I've tagged everything, I can just say trumpet. And then it shows me 5 songs with trumpet in it. I can lump them together, and I can put the ones with that have like a fade in or fade out beginning and end of song. I can put them together with something that, so basically it's a very highly laborious, time consuming and draining process that results in just an absolute perfect playlist. So yeah, now I'm basically finishing up with a hip hop of 2000s.
So like one of the things I'm very curious about, especially with Sifter and trying to assist people in researching anything, is like in this process, so you have the sequence of time, you have place, and there are tools that basically help you find music this way. I think music is a very interesting data type because there's emotion attached to these things. There's decibels. I'm just going through the data types. Let's call it properties. So what would be the things that would help you, let's say in a visual way, if you had to map these things out? Okay, so you have music, you have timeline that says 1980s. So I'm 1980s, I have songs, which you just dump all the songs in there, and it's from Jamaica, God knows where.
Yeah.
What other kind of characteristics are important to you to help you better define what goes into your playlist, as an example? So the research question or the goal of this thing is to make an appropriate playlist for that, I'd say year, I guess, right?
I mean, I can tell you what the website I'm using is doing. Like it basically shows a bunch of tags that are year tags. You just click on the years that interest you, then you type in your own words. Most of the time it works. Sometimes it's not in the archive.
Okay.
Let's just say, I would say 1980 to 1985, Poland, and then I would say, let's say, Cold Wave, right? And that works. It gives me all 15 releases that kind of fall under that.
Cold Wave's not a band, it's a genre. Yeah?
It's a genre. So then you just see the covers of the albums in one location. They're basically listed as a group. And that's nice because I like to see them all. So yeah, the visibility of the tags on the right side, the visibility of the covers on the left side, it gets a bit more visual. Then you have your selection in front of you. That works for me. That's fine.
Okay, so there's another thing I'm very curious about. What would you like to have that, like, you don't need to know technically how it's possible? What would be useful in this research process for you for music?
Okay, so I'm just freestyling here because I didn't give it any thought prior, right? But I believe that maybe it's just my sort of way of seeing things, but to me, sound can be either warm or cold. To me, some songs are really cold. Some are very warm. There could be a filtering function where you filter through warmth of the sound, right? Or the length of the song, or how syncopated wacky it is. Because sometimes a song is a certain way for the first minute, and then it gets, wacky, oddball, whatever. It's crazy, fully different song within one track. And, I don't want that because it doesn't really link up with something that I've already selected, right? Because it's too crazy.
So you're looking for songs that are consistent.
Let's say, right? So tracks that have like a one sort of feeling, like trudging, marching, rising, falling, whatever, that's a filter that doesn't exist, I don't think. So that's another and I believe, you as a product designer and, all in all aesthetic, wizard, you could make it into like a wheel of colors, right? Like in paint, where you sort of like pinpoint a hue of a color and that gives you songs, right? Or
the thing is with data, so like visual is one thing, so let's say the lyrics emotionally are different to the tonality.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's one color wheel and there's another color wheel.
Right. Because it could be like super aggressive and menacing and awful on the lyrical sort of
passive.
Yeah. But then it's sort of bubbly music, right? And yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I didn't think of that.
That's the thing I'm very interested in, like different data types and different types of ways of researching things. So I'm heavily invested in, say, journalistic research, but say with music, it's very interesting because it's also technical and emotional at the same time, which is brilliant. So you have things that one person would say this is depressing, and I would say it's not depressing. I think it's lovely. And I don't know why completely, but for me, it's uplifting because it is beautiful music.
Okay.
So my scale my lens, everything's a lens. My lens is the quality or the caliber of the music, where what he is saying is depressing.
Okay.
Or like in another, like I don't think the tonality is depressing at all, but a person gets affected by the emotion of it, God knows why. So that's why I think music is fascinating to research as well, right? So I don't know, like let's do the scales. We have lyrics, literal like meaning. We have like tonality. We have beat, obviously. We have period. We have genre.
Vibe.
Yeah. But vibe is basically what everything comes to in my opinion.
There's also the cover art. There used to be awful, horrible artwork on covers of music, and then suddenly it became a genre on its own. Covers now are gorgeous, like beautiful artistry. So I know that on Spotify you can sort of have your own cover for your playlist. What I like to do is I like to pick the first 4 songs with the most matching covers, because when you put the first 4 songs on Spotify, the mosaic of the covers is how you see the playlist, right? So then I would have to really select carefully what 4 covers together make for a great.
Okay, so like say within Sifter you want to navigate what you know to be true by say genre, outside of just trying to aesthetically, or maybe you want to do this thing, you want to place the things that look the prettiest or curated, meaning the thing that you like. Would you like something that can actually help you kind of match these things? So you've picked a genre and then it's going to pick 4 covers with the same green cover. You know what I mean?
Yeah. This, or how the songs link up, because that's the thing that I have to be most attentive to, right? So like if this one song has a long fading out finish and the next one starts with an instant sort of like drop or a pop, they link up nicely. But if one finishes with something like a spoken word that's cut halfway, the other starts with something I don't know, spacey or weird, they don't link up.
Well, this is another interesting thing about music, because I know this a little bit from like DJing stuff. It's like beats per minute. So this is actually probably the best reference point. So the reason why I think this is true is you try to merge 2 songs together. So it's a really interesting data point, because you might have like, I don't know, 128, and then you want to go to 132. And then hypothetically, if you're DJing, you would gradually migrate it to one to the other, right?
Or have a sort of mini DJ AI mix the endings and the beginnings of the songs. So like, let's say one ends with a trumpet, the next one starts with a trumpet. Have an AI or some algorithm mix them a little bit, so that there's an indistinguishable change, right?
Well, this is the thing with like AI stuff. You can eventually and hypothetically deconstruct something and then tag it to what it is, and then you can start to search and then place things together. I think it's a very interesting use case to try to like match music up to like what is the most appropriate song to like blend into, right?
And time is a factor too, because sometimes I really want a highly curated, just the most amazing playlist for a weekend trip to somewhere where I haven't been, right? Let's say I want to go to Greece, I want to go to Athens, and I want a Greek curated playlist, and I only have a week or 2 to prepare it. It's a very laborious process. Maybe there's something there that could help me with.
Yeah, sure. I'm very curious to like segue from that. So you have music, and then what else can you know about Greece? So you can do the history, yes, obviously, because Greece is has a lot of history. So it's about like the interesting thing about curating information is, what do you want to know? So we can do popular. Popular is like what everybody does. Yeah. And for me, I don't really care. Popular. I'm more curious about curiosities. It's a terrible word, but like the close thing. So it's like, so you're in Athens. What is the thing that is most curious to me in that place, which is close to your taste? So you have a reference point of data, which is you, so modeling you, and then say you go to Athens to I don't know, ancient history. Like I know, but Eleusia has all this reference of history between the psychedelic culture. I don't know if you know about this at all.
Not at all.
So there's a book called The Immortality Key, which is I really suggest reading. Okay. If you don't know about it, you wouldn't even find this place interesting. So it's about basically a hidden cult at an elite level. Like Marcus Aurelius was basically one of the cult members. And I mean cult, not really cult, but like high level elite society, a place where you go to expand your mind.
All right.
How the hell would you know that? You wouldn't.
No.
But if you were to go to Athens, maybe you'd find out about this place, which is right next to Athens. And you're like, oh, maybe I might want to go there. And you're not going to do drugs, but...
Yeah. I mean, my go-to is usually... the opposite of whatever's mainstream. So if everyone goes to Athens for the old buildings, the antiquities, I will still visit with interest. I will still read up on it, but this wouldn't be my lens. My key lens would be, let's say, the counterculture, right? So like, what are the Greek punks like? Or I would choose a different lens, like Greek fashion or design or something, and that would be sort of incorporated into my weekend. I would still make sure to visit all the old buildings, and I would still read up on them, but this wouldn't be my lens. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I would maybe even remix that too, because ultimately, obviously, you want to post some stories, send some photos, have a photos of your own for your collection, whatever. And, I could mix those lenses. I could maybe be cheeky about it. So instead of posting a photo of just, a building, I would have it from a perspective where there's a punk leaning against the building or something like this. I'm making stuff up. But basically, my go-to is not the mainstream way, just the opposite way. Yeah.
This is counterculture. So like, I'm going to Japan and I'm very curious about, because I think Japan in general, all of its subcultures are counterculture because of its inherent order, which also makes it great. So both things are great. So I think we have a similar lens in these things where it's like to find the oddities or curiosities of a different culture. And I believe they definitely exist. And I think it's the most interesting thing to go to the counterculture. But again, with data and information of like what you have to define what is mainstream, not to say you need to state it in a document or something, but like if you only find you can find it first person or you can research it, right? So it's like, okay, counterculture is this, and you go, really?
Yeah.
Why is that a counterculture? It's because the oppression or the opposite of this thing is that, which makes a place so interesting. And that's why Japan is crazy interesting, right? It's like they have such an order to everything, so then people want to find and frame their individuality, right?
I mean, I have a feeling why you've steered this conversation towards Japan.
Why?
Which is because I've lived there and I've done research in Japan. I've worked at the sort of marketing agency that did cultural research for marketing purposes in Japan. So I've had a chance to really like dig deep in Japanese daily life and so on. And so what you're referring to is, the way I think about it is, in Japanese culture, there's a time and place for absolutely everything. They're boxing everything in their life, right? Yeah. Including the craziness, including the counterculture. They're so controlling of the etiquette and of how things are meant to be or expected to be, that if you want to go crazy and have a crazy hairstyle, listen to incredible weird music and, tattoo your face, you'll be able to do that. You'll be a minority, but you'll probably do it in the confines of your one assigned box, which is a specific street, specific 2 or 3 clubs that you're supposed to go to. It's not like you're going to go on a wild adventure and express all this counterculture of yours somewhere where it doesn't belong. You're going to do it where it belongs. That's the problem.
I think a tattoo is a funny one, right? Because like Japanese culture, it's like, if you get a tattoo, it's permanent. So like your family's like, oh my God, what did you do? And I think they have this with the baths as well, because of like...
The bath? No, this comes back to the perception of tattoos as something that criminals do. So Yakuza, right?
Yakuza, yeah.
So even if you have like a tattoo of a Kermit the Frog or something that doesn't really relate to Yakuza at all.
I know, but like you're so dangerous.
And an old Japanese lady will still like judge you and think, he's a hoodlum. He's a hoodlum. He's got a tattoo.
He's dangerous.
Yeah. So that's why bathhouses don't want to disturb. That's the thing about Japanese culture. And not just Japanese, East Asia in general, there's this drive for cohesion, social cohesion. So an individual is less important than a social cohesion on a higher level. So everything is designed for least disturbance, right? So you're not supposed to impose with your choices on people around you.
But what do people inherently want to do?
What Europeans?
Not Europeans, Japanese.
Like to do.
So like it has, I see it like a solar flare. So, okay, the sun is described as such. And then you have the individuals like, I need to do that.
I think there's an expectation and there's a physical reality of having to vent, right?
Yes.
Because if you have like pent up frustration or like you've been dealing with something that's traumatic to you, like it's contriving, it's limiting, it really bugs you, then you're going to explode eventually. And if you're not going to explode, then maybe you'll find like an outlet, right? Some niche.
That's Japan.
And that's Japan oftentimes, right? So they would...
Japan's amazing like that.
They would refer to some crazy niche that has like 5 people following it because it gives you a sense of belonging and sort of a facade of...
Identity.
Of being like your own. Yeah.
Like you craft an identity under social cohesion. I think both are naturally true, right? So like we all want to coexist or like be part of something. To some extent, we have the polar opposite nature, which is I want to be this specific thing. And you might find a subculture with that. And it's okay. But like I just want to be exactly what I want to be. Yeah. So I think both things are true always.
But for the record, since you hate when media tell you what to do and what to be, Japanese kind of like when media tell them what to do and what to be. So for instance, I can't recall the proper name of it, but women fashion, for instance. There are categories that you sort of evolve your life, and your style evolves with categories of what is expected of women of a specific age to dress like, look like, and behave like. So you have an assigned newspaper or a magazine that is specifically for women that are 21 to 26. There's another one for 26. It's normal in the sense that, there's magazines for young people and older people. But in Japan, it's incredibly specific down to an age, or like they put you in a bracket that's very well defined. And then the woman would just basically say, okay, I guess I'm exiting this bracket now and I'm entering this bracket. Let me buy this newspaper and see exactly which store I have to go to now and buy this specific blouse in this color from that shop, because this is the model for the summer. And then suddenly you have this eerie feeling that you're on a metro, and then there's 3 women dressed the exact same way and being similar age.
Oh my God.
So this is, I'm sorry, I can't recall the proper name for it, but there's basically a Japanese term for those categories, right? And those magazines, they basically uphold those categories, right?
Yeah, it's like defining who you should be. I think also by your nature, my nature, it's like a little bit counterculture, which in the sense of you would rather choose your own.
But that's the thing. We're not supposed to judge Japan through the European lens ever.
I'm not judging.
No, for sure. So basically, we just need to accept that there are some factors and dynamics in their social life that doesn't translate to ours. And one of them is the drive for the collective, for the cohesion, for the collective cohesion. And it manifests in many ways. And one of those ways is basically being okay with not being a crazy individual, liking belonging to a larger group.
It's interesting. I'm just trying to think of myself with these things.
Enjoying being middle class. Can you imagine a European boasting being middle class?
Yeah, I know people.
I'm mediocre.
Right? I know.
Yeah.
Not mediocre. I see it as their purpose in life is simple and they appreciate something. So everything for me with people is the thing that is their passion, and their passion could be simplicity. Going I just want to chill, and that's fair. That's fine. And then others are like, no, I just want to make my life as difficult as possible.
I'm one of those, for sure. Sign me up for that.
Me too. This is why we're friends, I guess, right? So it's I constantly make my life difficult, and that's. But I see the other. I have an uncle. He's he's a digger. He does digger stuff, and he's such an interesting character because he's both a simple guy and complex guy at the same time. He reads a lot. He reads a hell of a lot, but that's enough for him. So this is the difference between acquisition of knowledge versus expectation of life. So that's enough for him, which is fine. It's good. The key is knowing what you want and then participating in that. If you're living below that and you want something more, you're going to be in frustration. Yeah, but if it's exactly what you want, perfectly fine.
Yeah. So to each their own, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, well, Jan, I've taken enough of your time. This has been a fun conversation.
Pleasure is all mine.
Yeah. No, this is fun. I like talking to you, obviously. That's why we're friends. Otherwise, If there's anything that I can ask you about on the research side of things, for more the user research side, which is for, say, me and for Sifter, what would make your life easier? What are the pain points you go this is obviously a redundant process. This can make my life easy. So in Sifter, we have source, analyze, and report. So sourcing is the acquisition of information and searching through it. Analyzing is okay, where's the insight? Meaning can you help me, or I find it myself? And then reporting is how do I tell my story better?
I can't really describe quick fixes, because you'd have to see a final thing in front of you to see.
When have you got angry?
No, but the thing is, I have an answer, but I'm also a complicated case because I'm a bit sadomasochistic in a way that I do my research, because I would rather go the long way. I would rather have it laborious because it just feeds my need to fidget. But I guess one thing is the data that you filter, present, pack, unpack, and so on, that we've discussed already. But then there's also theories, concepts, things like this that you assign to the data, right? And they're oftentimes working theories. You have to start off with a hypothesis, then you enter the fieldwork to verify it. Then, the reality tells you whether you were right or wrong, or maybe there's a tweak to be made. So some way to marry the visualization of data and just the fact that the concepts that are attached to it are evolving. So maybe you keep track of the evolution of the thought. Maybe concepts merge, split. Maybe there's a visual way to...
Can you give me an example of 2 concepts that would merge to make it more tangible?
Make it more tangible.
When has this happened before, basically?
I would have to like really recall details of research, but let's just make one up.
Yeah, it's fine.
So let's just say you enter the fieldwork assuming that let's just say the Japanese want to save face culturally at all costs. Nothing else matters. Saving face is the main thing that they want to do. And then you enter the fieldwork where you study a situation with Japanese, let's say, colleagues. And let's just say that reality verified this, that yeah, they like to save face culturally, but in that specific one given instance, this wasn't why they made a specific choice. And let's say that repeats, there's a pattern. And then you realize that, yeah, there's a principle of saving face, but in the context of this demographic and in that context that repeats, it doesn't play a part. So you'd like to maybe document this finding in a way that doesn't separate saving face entirely, but allows you to make like an exception or like, show the exception visually.
So I'm trying to think of basically the benefit of like showing insights that from an AI perspective, like, okay, you have a body of knowledge here, and then an AI through pattern recognition can go, this is similar to something. It's not necessarily going to give you something that's new, but it can say this is similar to that over here in another culture or something like that. So if you were to get like A, B, C suggestion of going like, there is a pattern here that is seemingly close. We're not saying it is seemingly close to another psychological concept, sociological concept. Would that be beneficial to you to then further research into, or another way?
Yeah, I mean, that's clever. I mean, I'm not in love with the idea of having an algorithm suggest tweaks to me or notions that
by the insight level, but like the data level.
But maybe as a direction, or let's just say, hey, there's been 3 other researchers investigating this, and they've come to a similar point.
Interesting.
And then they've opted for a different direction. Try to investigate that, but then obviously you're risking influence, you're risking collusion. But what I'm saying is, if there was a way not to redirect the way that you do your research, but to maybe expose flaws, maybe in logic or rhetoric, or maybe there's a way to...
I'm assuming there's concepts of established, right? Which is like argumentative.
Or maybe I'm doing something that I'm not realizing is contradicting something I've already said myself.
But is that you?
No, but maybe I'm just not seeing it because I've made a statement and then I make another statement that's...
this in the like source analyzed reporting. So in the reporting sense, you are contradicting yourself.
Maybe my logic is flawed and I'm not seeing it.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the idea is to summarize what you're trying to understand. Like you understand yourself and then communicate.
There could be like red and green flags popping up saying like, are you sure about this? Have you considered that? I don't know. But I'm making this up on the spot, so
that's fine. This is what we're doing. We're just talking just generally what is beneficial, because every individual is different. Like for me, my obsession, which apparently is research, is basically the word curiosity, which is to see what exists and then to frame it and then make sense of it by our best reference of what we can find to be not necessarily most accurate, but like the most reference information that like, okay, this is more like there's more evidence, but I'm hyper aware of manipulation and propaganda. So I would like, my goal is like mechanisms to navigate that.
Yeah. What I've become sensitive to is, and I'm sharing my vulnerability here.
Go on.
I'm naturally attracted to the outliers, right? So if any research is a spectrum, you're going to end up with a bulk of data that is sort of middle way, that's maybe useful. And there will be things that pop up that are just so crazy, so interesting. It's flashy, a clickbait, So you'd like to give them more spotlight, but they're just not relevant. So some way to constrain myself from straying towards the outliers, for instance, or maybe just be able to document them appropriately as an outlier, so they're on record, but they're not distracting anymore. You see what I mean? It's easy to give you like, hey, did you know there's a bar in Tokyo? There's a bar in Harajuku where everything is dildos. The whole bar is dildos. Did you know that Japan has dildo bar? And so that's already somehow a lie because that bar exists, but it's just one bar and only women are allowed.
It's shock attacks.
And it actually serves a purpose of empowering women because it's supposed to demystify sex, which in Japanese culture is still a bit taboo, more taboo than we think. So, that
you live in Poland, Christian country.
I know, but that woman made this bar in that way for her own reasons and not to be just this, crazy, wacky, whatever thing that,
Yeah, but like this is the nature of media and sensationalism, which
exactly.
Is like,
That's a key word, sensationalism. So if there was a way to filter out sensationalism, outliers.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I would say you wouldn't be able to filter out, but you would be able to highlight it, right? Because you can see stuff that is more sensational by language. And I truly believe you can take language and use it as a technical means to define what something is as far as an article is concerned. So you can see that something is filled with rhetoric or sensationalism or God knows what. So these things I believe you can definitely do. So that's not too much of an issue. At the end of the day, I always think it's the simple thing of critical thinking, which is sensationalism exists. Look at that. Do you think it's that?
Yeah.
And then getting better at like allowing people to reference and understand such things exist.
Yeah.
So, but I think we had a good chat.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and we're probably going to hang out after this, obviously.
More of the non-alcoholic beers.
Yes, yeah. Go on. So I'm curious if you would like people to find anything that you're doing, or you can talk about a project that's interesting to you, let me know, and you can tell people.
The only sort of big announcement is that starting from next year, I will attempt to write a series of short books. That's something I haven't done before. Conceptually, I have them figured out. I just need to write them up. They'll be very, very short. Okay. I'm not going to tell you what they will be about, but they will be sort of structured around the concept of lists. And they will describe a lot of my previous research. Some of the things that we've discussed today will get to the books as well. So yeah, when it's done, you'll know. Yeah.
It's fine. Afterwards, if you want to give any links so people can like subscribe to an email or something else, you can let me know.
Sure. Thank you.